The morning light spilled like liquid gold over the eastern ridges of the Lake District, casting long shadows across valleys still wrapped in mist. I stood atop a small rise, my breath visible in the crisp April air, as I gazed upon what William Wordsworth once called the loveliest spots that man hath found. Before me stretched one of England's most precious treasures, the Lake District National Park, a realm of extraordinary natural beauty, in the northwestern county of Cumbria. The symphony of the Lake District begins each day with the quiet overture of dawn. This morning was no exception. The lakes, those magnificent jewels scattered across the landscape, lay still and reflective beneath the awakening sky. Windermere, the largest of them all, stretched like a silver ribbon through the valley floor, its surface occasionally disturbed by the gentle kiss of a morning breeze or the playful splash of a jumping fish. I'd risen before the sun, driven by the promise of witnessing this land in its most magical hour. Now, as the golden light touched the highest peaks Scafell Pike, Helvellyn, and Skiddaw, I understood why poets, painters, and wanderers throughout the centuries had been drawn to this place as if by some inexorable force. The Lake District, I whispered to myself, is not merely a destination, it is a revelation. The air carried the earthy fragrance of damp soil and fresh vegetation. Spring had begun its tender work on the landscape, coaxing the earliest wildflowers from their winter slumber. Delicate wooden anemones and vibrant celandines dotted the woodland floors, while the shadowy recesses between ancient trees harbored the unfurling fronds of ferns, each one a perfect spiral of geometric precision. As I descended toward the shore of Windermere, the morning chorus of birdsong reached its crescendo. The melodious fluting of blackbirds mingled with the cheerful chatterings of chaffinches and the distant mewing of buzzards circling high above the fells. Nature's orchestra played its timeless composition, a piece that had remained largely unchanged of the Lake for millennia. Are its lifeblood 16 major lakes and countless smaller tarns scattered like fallen pieces of sky among the surrounding hills. Each body of water possesses its own distinct character, its own moods and secrets. Windermere, majestic and expansive, welcomes visitors with open arms. As the morning progressed, I watched pleasure boats begin their daily journeys across its surface, white wakes trailing behind them like flowing calligraphy on the dark blue page of the lake. The eastern shore glowed with the warm colors of lakeside gardens coming into bloom, while the western bank remained shrouded in the shadow of towering trees and rising fells. Later, as I journeyed northward, I came upon Grasmere, a much smaller lake, but one whose banks once provided daily inspiration to Wordsworth himself. Here, the water seemed more intimate, more knowing. The surface reflected the surrounding fells with such perfect clarity that it was sometimes difficult to discern where reality ended and reflection began. A pair of mute swans glided across the surface with regal bearing, their passage hardly disturbing the mirror-like perfection of the scene. Water, an old Cumbrian man once told me, remembers everything it has seen. If that is true, then the lakes of this district must be among the wisest entities in England, their depths containing memories of Celtic settlers, Roman legions, Norse invaders, medieval monks, Victorian industrialists, and generations of farmers who have shaped this land over countless centuries. By midday, I had reached the shores of Ullswater, often described as England's most beautiful lake, stretching for nearly 8 miles between magnificent fells. Its serpentine from winds through the landscape like a living thing. The water here possessed a different quality of light, sometimes steely grey, sometimes an intense blue that seemed almost Mediterranean in its brilliance. Along Ullswater's shores, daffodils nodded in the gentle breeze, the very same sight that inspired Wordsworth's famous poem. I wandered lonely as a cloud, I recited softly, that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. The continuity of experience across generations struck me as profound. Here I was, 2 centuries later, moved by the same simple beauty that had touched the great poet's heart. The afternoon found me wandering through ancient woodlands, where time seemed to move at a different pace. The Lake District's forests are among its most enchanting features, mysterious realms where sunlight filters through canopies of oak, ash, birch, and due to create constantly shifting patterns on the forest floor. Grisdale Forest spread before me, a vast expanse of mixed woodland, interspersed with open areas where Herdwick sheep, the iconic breed native to these hills, grazed peacefully. The sound of my footsteps was muffled by a thick carpet of last year's leaves, now slowly transforming into the rich humus that nourishes new life. These woodlands tell stories of human interaction spanning thousands of years. Once, they provided the essential resources for daily life: timber for building, fuel for warmth, habitat for game animals hunted for food. More recently, they supplied material for the charcoal needed to smelt iron ore during the Industrial Revolution. The history of human civilization in this region is inextricably linked to these trees. Yet despite centuries of use, sections of these forests retain a primeval quality that speaks to something deep within the human spirit. In certain groves, where ancient oaks spread their massive limbs across mossy clearings, it was easy to understand why our ancestors perceived such places as sacred, as dwelling places of gods and spirits. I paused beneath a particularly magnificent oak tree, its trunk wider than my outstretched arms could encompass. How many human lifetimes had this giant witnessed? What storms had it weathered? What changes had it seen? Its gnarled bark and twisted branches told a story of resilience and slow, patient growth, a living testament to the virtue of remaining rooted while bending with life's inevitable winds. The forests of the Lake District are not merely collections of trees. They are communities of countless interconnected living beings. As I moved quietly through the dappled shade, I glimpsed red squirrels darting among the branches, their presence here a precious thing, one of the few strongholds where these native creatures still thrive despite competition from introduced grey squirrels. A roe deer and her fawn froze at my approach, then bounded away with astonishing grace, disappearing into the green depths like woodland spirits. Even the smallest inhabitants contribute to the forest's complex tapestry of life. Brilliant blue damselflies hovered above small streams, while iridescent beetles labored among decaying logs, performing the essential work of returning dead matter to the soil. Every creature, from the mighty oak to the humblest fungus, played its part in the greater symphony of the forest. For as afternoon gave way to early evening, I climbed toward higher ground, eager to experience the third great element of the Lake District's landscape, its magnificent mountains. Though modest in height compared to the giants of Europe or Asia, the fells of Cumbria possess a rugged grandeur entirely their own. The Lake District's mountains were born of fire and ice, shaped by volcanic eruptions some 450 million years ago, then carved and sculpted by the immense glaciers of successive ice ages. The result is a landscape of extraordinary variety in drama-sharp ridges, steep-sided valleys, massive scree slopes, and perfectly formed cirques where glacial ice once cradled. The ascent was challenging but rewarding. As I climbed higher, the trees gradually gave way to open moorland where heather and bracken dominated the terrain. The air grew cooler and clearer with each step upward, carrying the distant bleating of sheep and the occasional cry of a peregrine falcon riding the thermals above the ridges. From these heights, the true character of the Lake District revealed itself in panoramic splendor. The patchwork of fields and woods in the valleys below gave way to the smoother contours of the fells, their flanks lined with ancient stone walls that climbed impossibly steep gradients. The lakes themselves appeared as fragments of sky fallen to earth, their surfaces changing from deep blue to burnished silver as clouds passed overhead. These mountains have long been a place of challenge and inspiration. The great pioneers of British mountaineering tested themselves on these crags and faces long before attempting the Alps or Himalayas. Writers and artists found their creative voices among these peaks, not only Wordsworth and his fellow lake poets, but generations of creative souls who have felt the irresistible pull of this landscape. As I approached the summit of one modest fell, I came upon a carefully balanced pile of stones left by previous travelers. Some were clearly ancient, others added more recently. I selected a small stone from the path and placed it atop the pile, feeling a connection to both those who had passed before me and those who would come after. In this simple act, I participated in a tradition as old as human presence in these hills. The view from the summit was worth every step of the climb. In all directions stretched a sea of peaks and valleys, each with its own name and character, each holding countless stories of human endeavor and natural process. Scafell Pike, England's highest mountain, dominated the southwestern skyline, while the distinctive shape of Great Gable stood proud against gathering clouds. To the east, the long ridge of Helvellyn beckoned, with its famous edges striding edge and swirl edge etched sharply against the evening sky. I sat on a weather-smoothed rock, allowing the immensity of geological time to wash over me. These mountains had stood here, changing almost imperceptibly through thousands of human generations. They would remain long after I was gone, a humbling and somehow comforting thought. As the light began to soften toward evening, I descended toward one of the Lake District's charming villages, where the fourth element of this landscape's character would reveal itself: the human settlements that have existed in harmony with nature for countless centuries. The villages of the Lake District possess a distinctive architectural identity that seems to grow organically from the surrounding landscape. Built predominantly of local stone, with slate roofs quarried from the very mountains that shelter them, these settlements blend seamlessly into their natural surroundings. In places like Grasmere, Ambleside, and Keswick, centuries-old buildings stand as testament to the durability of traditional building methods and materials. I entered a small village just as golden hour was painting the stone walls with warm light. Church bells rang out across the valley, their clear tones echoing from the surrounding fells. Children played in a small green, their laughter mingling with the gentle murmur of the Beck stream that ran alongside the main street. Outside the village pub, locals and visitors alike gathered to share stories of the day's adventures. The relationship between the people of Cumbria and their environment has always been one of interdependence. The landscape has shaped the human culture through the challenges and opportunities it presents, while human activities have in turn modified the natural world. The result is not wilderness in a strict sense, but rather a harmonious integration of human and natural elements that has evolved over thousands of years. This harmony is perhaps most visible in the traditional farming practices that have shaped the lower fells and valleys. The distinctive Herdwick sheep, hardy creatures with dark wool that lightens as they age, have grazed these hills for centuries, creating and maintaining the open landscape character that we now associate with the Lake District. Without the constant presence of these grazing animals, much of the open land would revert to scrub and eventually forest. The farmers who tend these sheep are the inheritors of knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge of weather patterns, animal husbandry, and the specific characteristics of each patch of land. Their dry stone walls, built without mortar, yet standing for centuries, create the characteristic patchwork pattern visible across the hillsides. Each wall represents countless hours of skilled labor, with stones carefully selected and balanced against one another in a practice that has changed little since prehistoric times. As I walked through the village, I noticed other signs of traditional craftsmanship: hand-forged ironwork on gates and signs, carefully maintained gardens showcasing both ornamental plants and practical herbs, and buildings that had stood through centuries of Cumbrian winters. These were not museum pieces, but living expressions of a culture that values quality, practicality, and beauty in equal measure. In a small gallery, I discovered works by local artists who continue the long tradition of creative response to this landscape. Watercolors captured the delicate light effects on distant fells, while ceramics incorporated textures and colors drawn directly from the surrounding environment. These contemporary creators stood in a lineage stretching back to the earliest human inhabitants, who left their own artistic marks in the form of stone circles and rock carvings throughout the region. As darkness began to fall, I made my way to the shore of a small tarn hidden among the hills. Here, in the gathering dusk, the Lake District revealed yet another face, a realm of mystery and quiet contemplation. The surface of the water had become utterly still, creating a perfect mirror for the twilight sky. The boundaries between physical reality and reflection dissolved, creating a dreamlike quality that transported me beyond ordinary perception. A few early stars appeared overhead, their counterparts twinkling up from the depths of the tarn as if the water itself contained its own cosmos. This moment of perfect equilibrium, earth and sky, water and air, light and shadow existing in perfect harmony, seemed to capture the essential quality of the Lake District. Here was a place where apparent opposites coexist and complement one another: wild nature and human cultivation, ancient tradition and ongoing change, physical reality and poetic imagination. As night truly fell, the outlines of the landscape softened and merged. The separate elements that had revealed themselves throughout my journey, lakes, forests, mountains, and villages, now became a single unified presence, a breathing entity whose pulse I could almost feel beneath my feet. The Lake District at night holds its own special wonders. Away from major centers of population, the darkness here is profound, allowing the stars to shine with extraordinary brilliance. The Milky Way arched overhead like a celestial river, echoing the earthy waters I had traced throughout the day. Nocturnal creatures began their nightly activities. Tawny owls called from the woodlands, while bats performed their acrobatic flights above the water surface. Even in darkness, the symphony of life continued, though with different instruments now taking the lead. I spent the night in a small shepherd's bothy, a stone shelter used for centuries by those tending flocks on the high fells. Sleep came easily after a day of physical exertion and sensory richness, but I woke before dawn, drawn outside by some instinctive desire to witness the daily rebirth of this landscape. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten as I climbed to a vantage point above the valley. The air was preternaturally still, as if the world were holding its breath in anticipation. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, color returned to the land, first in subtle gradations of gray and blue, then in more vibrant hues as the sun approached the horizon. When at last the first direct rays of sunlight struck the highest peaks, illuminating them with golden radiance, while the valleys remained in shadow, I understood why our ancestors worshipped the sun. This daily miracle of light returning to the world never loses its power to inspire awe. As I watched this new day unfold, I reflected on what made the Lake District so special. It was not merely the physical beauty, though that was undeniable, nor was it simply the rich cultural heritage, though that added immeasurable depth to the experience. Perhaps it was the sense of continuity, the knowledge that despite all our modern complexities, we remain fundamentally connected to natural rhythms and processes that have sustained life for millennia. The Lake District National Park represents something increasingly precious in our rapidly changing world, a place where nature's pace still dictates the flow of life, where ancient traditions remain relevant, and where beauty in its purest forms can still be encountered. Its designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2017 recognized not only its natural splendor, but also the unique cultural landscape created through centuries of harmonious interaction between humans and their environment.